Baking bread from scratch, a timeless art. Crafting bread from scratch isn't just a chore for the Amish, it's a cherished way of life. While most of us might dump ingredients into a bread machine, press a button and move on, the Amish embrace a slower, more deliberate process. It's quieter, deeply connected, and undeniably soulful. They depend on the strength of their hands, a few simple tools, and an abundance of patience to bring their bread to life. Starting with the essentials. It all begins with selecting the right ingredients. This may seem straightforward, but there's a twist. Many Amish families don't simply grab a bag of flour from the nearest store. Instead, they often mill their grains at home or source flour directly from nearby farms. Imagine knowing the origins of every kernel of wheat that goes into your bread. It's a level of transparency and care most of us rarely experience. It's a true farm-to-table approach that makes you rethink the convenience of pre-packaged supermarket loaves. For the Amish, sourcing ingredients is more than just gathering supplies. It's an art form and a testament to their values. It's about prioritizing quality, fostering relationships, and embracing sustainability. The flour might come from a neighbor's mill, eggs from a friend's chickens, and honey from a cousin's beehives. These connections aren't just transactional, they're deeply personal. When your ingredients are gifts from your community, every loaf of bread becomes a tribute to their effort and care. A commitment to adaptability. However, it's not always easy. Poor harvests or unpredictable weather can force Amish families to adapt. They might substitute one grain for another, or find ways to stretch limited resources, much like our grandparents did in tough times. Despite these challenges, the results are often remarkable. There's something magical about a loaf born of resourcefulness. It carries a depth of flavor that speaks of perseverance. Farming with integrity. Long before organic became a buzzword, the Amish were practicing chemical-free, sustainable farming. They rely on crop rotation, composting, and time-honored techniques to keep their soil fertile for future generations. This kind of farming takes dedication and patience, but it yields grains that are richer in flavor and nutrients. Bread made with such grains tastes worlds apart from loaves baked with conventionally farmed ingredients. It's the difference between a garden-fresh tomato and the bland, watery kind you'd find in a supermarket. Sweet additions. Not all Amish bread is plain. For special occasions, a touch of honey or molasses is often added, infusing the bread with a subtle sweetness and warmth. It's amazing how a simple ingredient can transform a loaf into something extraordinary. I remember once attempting to sneak an extra slice during a visit to an Amish friend's home. Let's just say their grandmothers have a sixth sense for mischief, but honestly, the bread was worth it. The heart of the process. Once the ingredients are gathered, the true labor begins. Forget electric mixers and modern gadgets. Amish bread making relies on a bowl, a spoon, and hands well-versed in the art of kneading. The process is tactile, meditative, and steeped in tradition. It's not just about making bread, it's about honoring the connection between effort and reward. Baking bread this way reminds us that sometimes the simplest methods yield the most profound results. It's a tradition that not only fills the belly, but also nourishes the soul. The art of mixing. Dough by hand. A journey back to basics. There's something undeniably satisfying about tossing flour, yeast, salt, and water into a bowl and working them together. At first, it feels deceptively simple. A few easy turns of the spoon and you're off to a good start. But as the dough thickens, it transforms into a sticky, unyielding force, testing your resolve and arm strength in equal measure. It's a bit like wrestling a determined toddler, stubborn, messy, and just challenging enough to make you question why you started. The Amish, however, embrace this part of the process. For them, it's not just a chore, it's a ritual. There's a certain rhythm to mixing by hand. A scoop here, a fold there, repeated to a beat only the dough seems to know. This is no rushed task. It's an invitation to slow down, Focus and forget for a moment the chaos of the outside world. Patience in every stir. Hand mixing dough is as much a lesson in patience as it is a physical task. The ingredients don't instantly meld into a perfect ball of dough. Dry patches stubbornly cling to the bottom of the bowl, evading every stir like they're playing a game. The temptation to add just a bit more water can be strong, but too much liquid turns the dough into a sticky disaster that clings to your fingers like glue. The secret, as I've learned, is to let the dough guide you. If it's too dry, a small splash of water is all it needs. If it's too sticky, a light dusting of flour does the trick. It's a quiet, almost meditative exchange, a wordless dialogue between you and the ingredients. And as you listen and adjust, the dough slowly rewards your effort by coming together just right. Learning respect for the process. My early attempts at mixing dough were far from graceful. Frustration often got the better of me, and I remember one particular disaster when I decided to cheat the process. Dumping everything into a stand mixer, I thought, what's the worst that could happen? As soon as I turned it on, a cloud of flour erupted from the bowl, coating me and half the kitchen in a powdery haze. That was the moment I learned an essential lesson. Shortcuts don't belong in traditional bread making. Covered in flour and feeling thoroughly humbled, I cleaned up my mess and returned to the bowl, determined to do it the right way. Stirring by hand, I found a newfound respect for the process, and maybe for my ancestors, who perfected this craft without the luxury of modern gadgets. Connection through the process. Mixing dough by hand isn't just about the final product. It's about forming a connection. You feel the texture evolve beneath your hands, from gritty and uneven to smooth and pliable. The earthy scent of yeast rising begins to fill the air, a gentle reminder of the life growing within your dough. Every step feels intentional, grounding you in the moment and tying you to the countless bakers who came before you. It's also a surprising workout, a natural, no equipment required way to strengthen your arms and shoulders. Who needs a gym when bread dough can give you the same burn? A tradition. Worth preserving. There's a charm in doing things the old-fashioned way, knowing you're carrying on a tradition that's hundreds of years old. No shortcuts, no machines. Just the simple act of combining ingredients with your own two hands. It's a reminder that sometimes the most satisfying accomplishments come from respecting the process, taking your time, and putting in a little extra effort. So the next time you find yourself elbow deep in dough, wrestling with its stickiness and heft, remember, it's not just about making bread. It's about connecting with something timeless, something deeply human, and yes, something wonderfully satisfying. The art of kneading dough, a meditative challenge. When was the last time stirring something gave you a real sense of accomplishment? Mixing dough demands more than just blending ingredients. It forces you to stay completely in the moment. Rush the process, and the dough seems to know. It'll punish your impatience by refusing to rise properly or baking into a dense, unyielding brick. Kneading, however, is where the real work begins. Once the ingredients are mixed, it's time to roll up your sleeves and get to work. There's no shiny stand mixer to rely on here. It's just you, the dough, and the table. A test of patience and persistence. At first, the dough fights back. It's sticky and stubborn, clinging to your hands and resisting your efforts. Kneading isn't just a physical task. It's a test of persistence. Stretch, fold, turn, press, repeat. Over time, the dough begins to yield, softening under your hands, transforming into something smooth and elastic. If you've never kneaded dough before, brace yourself. It's a workout. After my first attempt, I felt like my forearms had gone through a boot camp. But as tiring as it might be, the sense of achievement that comes with it is absolutely worth it. Mastering the rhythm. For the Amish, kneading dough is second nature. Their hands move with a precision and rhythm honed by years of practice. Watching an Amish baker at work is mesmerizing. They seem to know exactly when to fold, how much pressure to apply, and when the dough is ready. They don't rely on timers or detailed instructions. Instead, they trust their instincts and experience. The dough itself tells you when it's ready. A gentle poke should leave a slight spring back, almost like a bread version of a handshake. For confirmation, there's the window pane test. Stretch a small piece of dough until it forms a thin, translucent membrane without tearing. If it does, you've reached the sweet spot. It's a moment of quiet triumph that feels almost magical. Therapy in motion kneading isn't just about technique, it's therapeutic. There's a soothing quality to the repetitive motions, a rhythm that quiets the mind. Some people splurge on stress balls or mindfulness retreats, but all you really need is a lump of dough. 10 minutes in, whatever was troubling you seems to melt away. It's just you, the dough, and the steady rhythm of your hands at work. By the time you're done, you've not only prepared a loaf of bread, you've given yourself a break from the chaos of life. Kneading dough connects you to something deeper. It's a simple, timeless act that reminds you to slow down, focus, and enjoy the process. And when the dough is finally ready, it's not just a loaf of bread you've made. It's a small piece of peace in an otherwise busy world. The joys and trials of kneading and rising dough. I once read that bakers tend to live longer than the average person, and after spending time kneading dough, it's easy to see why. It's like getting free therapy with the bonus of fresh bread at the end. Who could resist? The Amish seem to embrace this idea fully, even injecting a bit of humor into the process. One Amish man quipped that kneading dough is like wrestling a polite bear. It puts up a fight at first, but ultimately cooperates. And he wasn't far off. Dough truly seems to have a personality, especially on humid days when it stubbornly resists your efforts. Kneading in the summer heat? That's a battle in itself, like trying to wrangle a damp sponge. But the payoff? Absolutely worth it, even if it leaves you sweatier than you'd like. A group effort with heart. In Amish communities, kneading isn't always a solo task. It's common to see families working together, with children eagerly pressing their small hands into the dough, mimicking the seriousness of seasoned bakers. Sure, the results might be a bit uneven or lumpy, but no one minds. Those little imperfections only add to the charm, turning each loaf into a unique creation full of love. That's the beauty of homemade bread. Its flaws make it special. It may not look perfect, but it tastes better than anything mass-produced because it carries the warmth of human touch. A tradition that stands the test of time. In an age of bread machines and stand mixers, kneading dough by hand might seem outdated. But there's something deeply satisfying about it. This timeless practice connects us to the generations who did the same thing, long before electricity existed. Every fold and stretch is a nod to history, a way of honoring the craft. I like to imagine that if bread kneading were an Olympic sport, the Amish would sweep the competition, winning gold effortlessly. And knowing their generous nature, they'd probably bake a loaf for the silver and bronze medalists as well. The art of rising. Once the dough has been kneaded to perfection, it's time for a well-earned rest, for both you and the dough. This stage where the dough rises is about more than just waiting. It's a lesson in patience and trust. You've done your part, and now it's time to let nature work its magic. Amish bakers have perfected the art of finding the ideal spot for rising. Covered with a cloth, the dough is tucked away in a warm, draft-free corner, almost like putting a baby down for a nap. And just like with a baby, things can get unpredictable. Too cool, and the dough sulks, refusing to rise. Too warm, and it races ahead like it's in a marathon. I've learned this the hard way. Once I left dough rising on a sunny windowsill, thinking it would speed things up. When I returned 3 hours later, it had ballooned into a monstrous blob, spilling over the bowl like it had plans to conquer the kitchen. Punching it down felt oddly satisfying, like popping bubble wrap with a purpose. The flavor factor rising isn't just about volume, it's about flavor. As the yeast gets to work, it doesn't just create air bubbles. It develops those subtle, complex flavors that make homemade bread so much better than store-bought. Some bakers even let their dough rise overnight, allowing it to ferment slightly and take on a rich, tangy character. Bread, like good wine or aged cheese, needs time to develop its personality. This step also teaches an important lesson. You can't rush quality. Trying to speed up the process will only lead to disappointment. A dense, unappetizing loaf that even ducks might reject. The Amish, of course, take this in stride. While the dough rises, they make the most of the downtime, churning butter, sweeping the porch, or swapping stories over a cup of coffee. The magic of a perfect rise. There's something almost magical about uncovering a bowl of risen dough. What was once a lumpy, sticky mass transforms into a smooth, airy puffball, ready to be shaped and baked. It's like it spent its downtime practicing yoga, coming back refreshed and full of potential. Of course, dough can still surprise you. I've had moments where I forgot about it entirely, only to find it oozing over the edges of the bowl like it was ready to explore the kitchen. While it can be a sticky mess, salvaging it is always part of the adventure. A little chaos makes the final loaf that much more rewarding. Ready for its next chapter. When the dough has risen to perfection, it's ready for the next step, shaping. This is where the bread's personality truly shines, whether it becomes a simple loaf, a batch of soft rolls, or an intricate braided masterpiece for a special occasion. Each step in bread making is a testament to patience, effort, and love. And by the time the dough is baked and the aroma fills the kitchen, you know it was worth every moment of the journey. From dough to perfection, the art of shaping and baking. Amish bread. Before a loaf of bread can be baked, it needs one last stretch and fold. A small but crucial step to ensure it has the strength to hold its shape in the oven. While rising is all about patience, shaping the dough is where creativity comes to life. The creative process of shaping. At last, the dough is ready to become what it was destined to be, a loaf of bread, a roll, or perhaps a beautifully braided masterpiece. There's something immensely satisfying about lifting the warm, elastic dough from the bowl and guiding it into its final form. This stage isn't just practical, it's artistic. For everyday loaves, Amish bakers might shape the dough into simple rounds or oblong forms. But for special occasions, the creativity flows. Braided breads, woven with 3, 5, or even 6 strands, often take center stage. These intricate creations carry meaning. Braids at weddings symbolize unity, while perfectly rounded rolls at Sunday suppers embody warmth and hospitality. Not every attempt is perfect. When I first tried braiding a loaf, it ended up looking more like abstract art than a traditional design. Still, even the most peculiar loaves taste delicious, and their quirks add to the charm. A hands-on tradition. Shaping dough might look straightforward, but it takes strength, precision, and a touch of finesse. Folding, tucking, and pinching the edges requires just the right balance of firmness and care. Push too hard, and the dough flattens. Handle it too gently, and it loses structure. The Amish often say that shaping dough builds character, and there's truth to that. It's a process that blends effort and intuition, teaching the importance of persistence. A well-shaped dough has a smooth, taut surface that helps it hold its form as it bakes. I learned this the hard way after casually flopping dough into a pan and ending up with a loaf that resembled a deflated football. In Amish kitchens, shaping is a family affair. Parents teach children by example, with little hands sneaking bits of dough to play with. While kids might poke holes in a loaf here or there, these small moments of chaos become cherished memories, woven into the rhythm of daily life. The magic of traditional baking. Once shaped and rested, the dough is ready for its ultimate transformation, baking. For the Amish, this step is more than a science. It's an art. Many Amish homes rely on wood-fired or brick ovens, which require skill, patience, and a deep connection to the process. These ovens are worlds apart from modern appliances with precise temperature settings and timers. Instead, Amish bakers rely on instincts honed over generations. To test the heat, a sprinkle of flour is thrown onto the stone surface. If it turns golden within seconds, the oven is ready. If it burns, it's time to let things cool down. Starting the fire for a wood oven is an event in itself. It begins hours before baking, with logs carefully arranged to build and maintain heat. In the sweltering heat of summer, this process can feel like working in a sauna, but the results are worth every drop of sweat. A dance of flame and dough. Wood-fired ovens have personalities of their own. Some heat unevenly, others cool too quickly, and a few seem temperamental, cooperating one day and refusing to the next. Amish bakers adapt to these quirks with ease, using their hands to gauge the temperature. Just a quick reach inside, long enough to assess the heat without getting burned. When asked how they know the oven is ready, Amish bakers often smile and say, "You just know." It's a level of intuition built through years of experience, much like knowing exactly how long to brew a cup of tea to perfection. From chaos to masterpiece. Not every baking attempt goes smoothly. I once tried baking in a wood-fired oven, imagining a rustic adventure. The result? A loaf so dense it could double as a doorstop, paired with the soundtrack of a smoke alarm blaring in the background. That experience gave me even more respect for the Amish bakers who make it look effortless. Despite its challenges, baking bread in a traditional oven has a unique charm. It's not just about creating food, it's about continuing a tradition, connecting with the past, and crafting something truly special. The journey from a simple lump of dough to a beautifully baked loaf is a testament to patience, skill, and love. When the aroma of freshly baked bread fills the air, you know every step was worth it. From the first knead to the final bake, the process is as nourishing to the soul as the bread is to the body. The unpredictable charm of traditional bread baking. There's an unpredictability to bread baking that makes it all the more enchanting. It's not about achieving perfection. It's about embracing the process. As the Amish often say, bread reflects the baker's state of mind. If you're calm and focused, the bread cooperates. If you're rushed or distracted, it might just come out wonky to keep you humble. Baking with patience. There's nothing quite like the aroma of bread baking in a wood-fired oven. The smell permeates the entire house, clinging to clothes and lingering long after the loaf is removed. I once couldn't resist slicing into a loaf before it had fully cooled, only to watch it crumble in protest under my knife. It was a harsh reminder. Good bread doesn't just require patience, it demands it. With traditional baking, the process itself is a ritual. There are no shortcuts or fast tracks. The bread will be ready in its own time, and that's part of the beauty. Once the loaves are placed in the oven, the real challenge begins, knowing exactly when to take them out. The art of perfect timing. If you've ever baked bread, you know the dance of timing. It's not as simple as setting a timer and hoping for the best. The Amish approach timing with intuition, a rhythm developed through experience rather than relying on clocks. Bread, after all, has its own sense of time. The first clue is the smell. As the bread bakes, the aroma evolves from yeasty to rich and nutty, filling the air with that unmistakable fragrance that's impossible to ignore. I've hovered around the oven more times than I care to admit, waiting for that perfect aromatic shift, only to jump the gun and end up with a pale crust and an underbaked center. For the Amish, visual cues are key. The crust should turn a deep golden brown, teetering on the edge of becoming too dark. A pale crust means the bread isn't ready, while one that's too dark signals it's gone too far. Another old-school trick is tapping the bottom of the loaf. A hollow sound means it's done. Anything less, and it's back in the oven. Of course, flipping a hot loaf to test it isn't for the faint-hearted. The danger of impatience. Opening the oven door too early is a classic mistake. The temptation to peek is strong, but the sudden drop in temperature can cause the dough to collapse, leaving you with a flat, dense loaf. It's like skipping ahead to the twist in a suspense movie. There's no going back once the moment is ruined. In bread baking, patience isn't just a virtue, it's a necessity. Baking with the seasons timing isn't static. It shifts with the seasons, adding both charm and challenge to traditional baking. A loaf that bakes perfectly in 30 minutes during the winter might need less time in the summer. Some say it's the ambient temperature. Others attribute it to humidity. An Amish friend once joked that bread has a personality, like a child that rebels if rushed. You have to let it grow at its own pace. Instinct over tools. Experienced bakers develop a near magical instinct for knowing when bread is done. They don't rely on thermometers or timers. Instead, they watch how the crust pulls away from the pan or listen for the subtle crackling as the loaf cools. It's the kind of knowledge that comes from baking hundreds of loaves, an art refined over time. I once asked an older Amish baker if she ever used a timer. She smiled warmly and said, "Why would I need one? The bread tells me when it's ready." The final stage, waiting and savoring. After all the mixing, kneading, and baking, the hardest part is often what comes last, waiting. The bread may look perfect, filling the home with an irresistible aroma, but slicing into it too soon is a classic mistake. The Amish understand this well, knowing that bread needs time to settle. Removing a hot loaf from the oven is only the beginning. Giving it time to cool properly is where patience truly pays off. The value of letting bread cool. Have you ever tried slicing a loaf fresh from the oven? If you have, you'll know the chaos that follows. Instead of neat slices, you're left with a pile of steaming crumbs. That's the bread's way of saying, not yet. Traditionally, the Amish place loaves on wire racks to cool, allowing air to circulate and preserving the crispness of the crust. Skipping this step is like ironing a shirt only to crumple it up right afterward. Why go to all that effort? Some say the Amish are so dedicated to this process that they'll leave a loaf to cool for an entire day before slicing it. I haven't quite managed that level of self-restraint, but there's wisdom in the wait. Cooling isn't just about preventing crumbs, it's also about enhancing flavor. As the loaf cools, the flavors have a chance to settle and deepen. The ingredients, flour, water, yeast, that work so hard to transform into bread are finally given time to mellow and blend. Cutting too early is like listening to a song that ends halfway through. I once thought I could outsmart the process by sneaking a slice while the bread was still hot. I grabbed a knife, ready for a fresh, buttery slice, but the result was a pile of crumbs, melted butter pooling at the bottom. That was when I learned. Good bread truly is worth the wait. Don't worry, the loaf isn't going anywhere, unless you've got a house full of kids, that is. The ritual of patience. Some think cooling is purely about science, but it's also part of the ritual. There's something almost meditative about this in-between time, when the bread is finished baking, but not yet ready to eat. It's like waiting for tea to steep or quietly listening to the rain. In Amish homes, this pause is often filled with storytelling, tying up chores, or simply enjoying a moment of calm. It's as if the bread demands not only patience, but also presence. An Amish friend once taught me a trick. Tap the bottom of a cooled loaf, and if it sounds hollow, it's perfectly done. There's something so satisfying about that simple knock knock. It's like the bread itself is giving a nod of approval. The art of slicing. Once the bread has finally cooled, it's time to slice and enjoy. But here's a tip I learned the hard way. Never use a dull knife. Attempting to cut a fresh loaf with a blunt knife only leads to a battle you'll likely lose. A sharp blade makes all the difference, ensuring your slices look just as beautiful as they taste. After waiting for the bread to cool, you'll want those slices to come out perfectly. Finally, with the loaf cooled and ready, all that's left is to enjoy it, ideally with the ones you love. There's no better reward after all that patience than sharing and savoring each slice.